Kizzume is a fine fellow and a fellow YouTuber who makes some interesting videos from a somewhat similar left-wing perspective to me, though he's a bit more solicitous and gentle with people than I am. But he did a video recently about one of my favourite topics, language, and colloquial definitions matter was his point. And I think that's true, but I think he's going a little gentle on certain people. Now, as an atheist, I often get into arguments and discussions with religious people, and one of the sticking points when arguing with creationists in particular is theory. Now, colloquially, the word theory has a variety of meanings. It can mean a hunch or a supposition, or it has a range of meanings, all of which are fairly indefinite. In science, it has a very specific meaning. A theory is essentially a confirmed hypothesis, whereas the colloquial meaning is closer to hypothesis, a reasonable guess that you're then going to check and confirm. And if it's confirmed, then in terms of science, then that's when it becomes a theory, and a theory is the highest order of knowledge in science. When we use the term theory in this way, we're using it in a particular technical scientific way, but we're not trying to redefine the term theory. We're not trying to make every use of the word theory everywhere mean the scientific definition of theory. Not at all. We're just saying, we're talking about science here. This is the meaning that this term has in science. And if the person that you're discussing with has any kind of sense whatsoever, they will agree that this is different than the colloquial term. And they will understand that you're talking about something more definite, more supported than mere conjecture, which would be the colloquial definition. Of course, most creationists aren't reasonable or rational and will not agree to you using it in a technical way. But in no way are you trying to overwrite the meaning of theory as it exists in other ways, in other contexts. What's going on with terms like sexism and racism and so on is different, I think. When we run into people in discussions who are, say, anti-white, and you point out that they are being racist, they are being prejudiced towards a person on the basis of their race, which is the very definition of racism. They will then try to use a technical definition of racism from sociology, which includes prejudice plus power. And they will argue that since you're white or since you're male, you have the power and therefore you are the oppressor, and anyone exhibiting prejudice towards you on that basis is not being racist or sexist, or indeed cannot be racist or sexist. This isn't just applying a technical term, because what they're talking about is actually systemic or systematic or institutional racism. So, we already have a subterm for that. Rather, they're trying to impose their particular definition of ism on everybody else. They're trying to shift and change the colloquial meaning. This is something different, this is something sinister. It is an attempt to manipulate and control language, and I object to that. I object to that as a writer and as someone who likes clarity, because what they're doing is they're obfuscating and shifting and changing the meaning to the point where it renders communication virtually impossible, because we cannot agree on a definition. So it really stymies any kind of discussion and any way of communicating. This is why people like Dawkins and Sagan, the great science communicators, have been so important. They can take complex scientific ideas and render them into more approachable forms of communication. So stories, fables, colloquial English. Claus does this very well as well. Tyson does this very well as well. There are not similar figures for the social sciences as compared to proper actual real sciences. There are not communicators who do the same thing. Rather, this language seems to get piled up on top of each other, to the point where even people steeped in it don't seem to be able to pick up on fake papers that are submitted, as with the SoCal affair or the conceptual penis more recently. So communication is important, semantics is important, and the way in which we shift and change the meaning of words is important. There's a difference between me describing somewhere as a small dark room or a tenebrous and claustrophobic room. These terms are synonymous, but they carry with them different meanings and different connotations, and they're received differently, and they create a different feel. And so it is with technical, technically descriptive language as well. So I think it's not the same thing. It's just not the same thing at all. There is something more sinister and nasty, and while the term is overused, I think Orwellian is appropriate here, because there is an Orwellian attempt to redefine terms, to redefine language, to make it harder or even impossible for you to express what's going on. And we already have perfectly good terminology for what it is that they're trying to express: institutional, systematic, or systemic racism. But that doesn't mean that racism can't exist in other ways, as prejudice on the basis of race, or all the other isms. I mean, this contention that racism is prejudice plus power doesn't hold up anyway. When you examine the polling data, you find that the people who tend to hold the most racist views are the people with the least power in society. The lower working class, the underclass, the disaffected, the dispossessed, the out of work. When you look at an EDL march, or the kind of people that sign up to vote for the BNP, do these strike you as people with positions of power and privilege in society at all, or do they strike you as the very opposite? What is the root of their prejudice? They feel that what little they have is under threat, and the fighting becomes vicious when the stakes are very small. Zang. Pulp Nova is a collection of short stories in the old pulp style but with a modern twist. You should find something here you like, from western to mythos horror to science fiction. You can get Pulp Nova at Drive-Thru Fiction, on Amazon, or in hard copy from lulu.com.